Hello, everyone. It's Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to the Development Hell podcast. And is the meeting of the Movie Club. And we're here to talk about another French movie in our catalog, and that is The 400 Blows from director Francois Truffaut, one of the most famous filmmakers in the history of France. And we got Joe, we got Jim, we got Kevin, and of course me here to do our thing and talk movies. And let's get started how we usually do, which is let everybody give a little bit of their 2 cents first, general thoughts, and also your history with the film. But Joe, let's go.
So it's good to finally be back. I've been out for a while, so it's good to be back. Um, I going into this film, I was looking forward to it because growing up, I had this book that was interviews by Truffaut interviewing Hitchcock. So it was mostly about Hitchcock, but it was from the perspective of Truffaut asking him questions. So I was always curious about Truffaut. I think the film itself pretty interesting. I mean, for if one, I'm gonna be completely honest when it comes to like me watching this film. I was kind of multitasking, so I didn't really get it. It was kind of like that other film we were watching before, the other foreign film, where I hadn't really had a chance to really absorb it as much. But at the same time, that's what I love about this movie club is that you get to find new films and really find new things that really expand your horizons. So really, really grateful for being able to have seen this film.
Absolutely. Jim, what are your thoughts?
Also, the first time seeing the 400 Blows. I don't really know anything about Truffaut. I kind of was aware that he's a big name in French cinema. And I'm like vaguely aware that this film had something to do with kind of a new wave of some kind. But I didn't really have a lot of context. I liked that they didn't lose a lot of time in making the whole family kind of sympathetic characters. Like, yeah, I didn't particularly feel like what was that Robert Redford movie we watched where the mother was just like she was just horrible.
Or
What was the
ordinary
For
people.
people.
Ordinary People? It wasn't I didn't feel the same way about this mother. Like and the dad, I feel like he had a pretty good relationship with his adoptive son at first, and then things get really complicated actually. So I think it merits kind of a discussion to tease everything out. Um, I noticed a Napoleon Easter egg in Renee's bedroom. Um, I noticed that the music sounded a little bit like The Departed, which thematically shares a lot. So I was wondering if Scorsese was inspired by this movie a lot. And then
I'm sure he was.
I'm sure he was on some level. And then the star, what's his name? Jean-Pierre Léaud, I think is the way you pronounce it. He has kind of this classic, like Christian Bale's got it, Jackie Coogan had it. There's like a kind of an innocence to the face, but they also act like very precociously. They act like adults, but they look like kids. So, um, yeah, I thought that the actor and the performance were probably kind of timeless because that's that has been done again and again in different contexts in different countries and with different actors and directors. All in all, yeah, really positive for me.
How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I also didn't know really anything about this going into it. I came away really thinking the main child actor did a good job. Um, the one playing Antoine. I enjoyed the mother in the movie. I thought her little arc was pretty interesting. I saw a lot of similarities between her and the main character. Um, it was cool to see this for the first time. I liked all the traversing around Paris he did and getting to see those shots of Paris in the 1950s. That was kind of cool. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, this was, I think, my second or third time watching this. I have this on Criterion Collection, and obviously, because this is the start of one of the most iconic directors in French cinema. And this was dead in the heart of the French new wave of filmmaking that really reshaped cinema in the late 50s into the 60s. And a lot of directors were heavily influenced by that, including Scorsese and even Steven Spielberg, because Truffaut starred in Close Encounters of the Third Kind as a scientist in it because of that very fact that Spielberg had that connection. And you could definitely feel that because I feel like a lot of Spielberg child protagonists have a lot in common with like this rambunctious, precocious young gentleman. And yeah, Jean-Pierre Lénaud is so good in this. He is such a wily kid. And I feel like it's pretty cliche to see stories like this at this point, but putting in the perspective that like this is 1959 and seeing this kind of film and the impact that it made. Truffaut won Best Director at the Cannes Film Festival for this film, uh, and was nominated for the Palme d'Or. And this was nominated for Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars. So that's pretty fascinating that international film at that point was nominated for a big Oscar category like that. I know it's become more common recently because they've diversified the academy, but like that's a big deal. And this is so expertly written, and this kid is so much fun to watch in all of his shenanigans and just his interactions with his mother and his stepfather. I particularly like the dynamic with the stepfather is fun. And then to be that guy to say this to build off what Kevin said, it really felt like Paris was another character in the film, because it really captures the beauty of this city and all the way up to the final scene. This final scene is so iconic at this point in terms of that shot on the beach. And it's such a beautiful shot. This is so well shot, and the music and everything put together. It's such a great coming of age story and a fun film to watch this kid just being up to all kinds of shenanigans, because you expect films like this today to come from like to be like silly Disney Plus movies and stuff like that. And like this is like high class art house new wave French cinema doing a fun little coming of age story like this. So I'm sure the likes of like Richard Linklater and directors like that who've become so synonymous with these slice of life coming of age stories definitely have a lot to um honor this particular film.
I mean, should we start at the end and move our way backwards? Because I was I wanted to talk about what the meaning of the sea was in this, not just in the shot, but in the movie, because the mother, apologies for not actually saying her name, but Antoine and his mom keep bringing up something's loading on my computer, and I don't even know what it is.
I think his
They keep
mom's
bringing up
name's
the sea.
Gilbret.
Gilbert and Douanel, but Douanel's his stepfather's name, right? Antoine is his real name.
Julian
Julian.
is the stepfather's first name.
Okay. But in the beginning of the movie, I noticed they keep calling him Douanel, the kid. And at some point during the film, I decided that that was not just his name, but his stepdad's like last name. So I don't know. But I'm curious to know what you guys thought about the meaning of the sea, kind of to the movie. Like, is it supposed to be limitless possibilities, or like kind of escape? Is it supposed to be, because the only way I see that playing out is that, I mean, he's now at the beach, he's going to get caught again and brought back to the home, right? So like, what, I don't know what it actually means ideologically, thematically.
I would argue about how like oceans are scary. you know, just crashing waves. I mean, we're bringing up ordinary people, right? Like water, like the ocean was like where his brother died. Um, you know, there's a lot of unpredictability. There's crashing waves, and there is a beauty to it. You know, in some ways, you know, you riding waves, there's something fantastic and beautiful about it. But at the same time, there's still unpredictability, and there's still, you know, a lot of danger that comes with water.
Yeah, I feel like I think it's a perfect kind of metaphor for the life that he has ahead of him because balancing what Joe's talking about, the danger, the fear, the vastness. And that vastness can be overwhelming. It can be exciting. It's a whole new experience and it's something that you get to go explore. And it is scary in the sense that like there's no roads, there's no direction uh out in the ocean, but that's life, right? And I feel like that's such an interesting way of portraying what's ahead of him. And it'll be interesting to see because like it'll I think it might be a fun discussion at the very end for each of us to one tell if we're going to take this kid to Applebee's slash what do you think he's going to wind up being when he grows up? I think that would be a fun little discussion because that's what this film is. Like you get to know this kid so well over the course of this film. But the thing is, like his life doesn't progress a ton in the film. He's still a young kid. He has his whole life ahead of him. What's he going to do with it? And I feel like that's, at least to me, that's where that metaphor is going.
Yeah, I definitely took it to mean he wants to see a little bit more of the world, and it kind of parallels back to everything he's been doing in the movie up to that point. You know, it starts out he's sneaking out of school so he can go see Paris, and then at the end of the movie, he's sneaking out of his academy or wherever he was, juvenile academy he was placed into, to go see the ocean, and he's always getting out to get into some trouble, you know. And I think he's going to continue doing that for the rest of his life.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting if that kid winds up being one of those like people's like, I was such a shit when I was a kid, and now I'm just like regular functioning adult, or he's gonna be some kind of con man. He's gonna be a grifter, just
Well,
messing with people.
but you know, I think that's kind of the because I was reading about how like they were saying this is like it's pronounced Truffaut. That's how you pronounce his last name.
I
Um,
think I'm American. I don't speak French, but that's
exactly. Like
so
they were
that's
saying
my
that this was
ability.
they were saying that this was like autobiographical in a sense that, like you said, you know, you start off as a, I mean, we're all crazy kids, and at some point we kind of just like level out. So I would like to think that maybe, you know, he's gonna get his stuff together at some
That's
point.
an interesting question, a statement, Joe. Were we all crazy kids?
I was.
Did we all get up to shenanigans?
That is a very good question
I'm
oh,
actually
okay.
going to make everybody answer this. So, Joe, you were a
Oh,
little
listen,
troublemaker.
I would, you know, a little bit about me. There's too much information, but like, um, so I became a counselor, and I primarily work with kids that deal with like attention issues because as I've come to learn, that was a problem I had as a kid. But I wasn't the one that would be, you know, hyperactive. I was never necessarily a hyperactive kid. I was just attention in that it was very easy for me to forget things and be in and not have attention issues in that sense. So like it was very easy for me to just like be told that you forgot a lot of stuff. Like I always had this like scenario in my mind where like I imagined I had amnesia some days, or like I watch movies where characters have amnesias because those storylines appeal to me so much because I felt like a guy with amnesia some days where it's like you forgot to do this, you were supposed to do that, this, you know, this homework assignment was this day. You know, as a kid, I was just like, I have no freaking clue what you're talking about. It's like, yeah, because you were doing 5 billion other things, or watching the Disney afternoon when you should have been, you know, doing your math homework. But I think it was Fox Kids. That's what I was glued to, and Simpsons. from
Oh,
seven
Fox Family. I
Fox
used to
Family.
watch that in the morning before I went to school. Watched
Or did
X-Men, the
you record
Spider-Man
it?
cartoon.
Right. Did you record it so that you could watch it later?
No, I was up early. I just
Oh,
watched it.
okay.
How about you, Jim?
I was gonna say I was a good kid, and then I got into trouble later. But like, looking back, I'm not so sure. Like, I remember my friend's dad used to keep a fridge full of old Milwaukee, and I was definitely the one who cracked that open. It was not him. I definitely got him into trouble for that. Um, I feel like this kid. I feel really nervous about his future because like I feel like we're supposed to take away from it that he's not a bad kid, but like bad things just keep happening to him. Like for example, in the beginning of the movie, there's a pinup being passed around the classroom. He's the one that gets caught like with the pinup in his hands. You know what I mean? Um,
Just that luck.
yeah, and like every time that the system tries to straighten him out, it just makes it worse. Like it just keeps knocking him down another peg, you know what I mean? So I feel like that character could very easily wind up being like a lifetime con, you know what I mean? Um, I also read something about it being semi-autobiographical. Um, so I would guess that meant the director was just kind of he was an outside the box thinker. The Balzac thing was very interesting to me. Like, I guess the kid was supposed to be gifted in some ways, but like just misunderstood. Um, I was definitely a better student than the kid in this movie, though, for sure.
Yeah, I could definitely see him growing up to be like a grifter, but I think it makes a lot of sense that like if this was correct and Truffaut was this way when he was a kid, he became an artist. And you know what? He finally found a way to channel all that creativity. And that was the thing. He was probably a kind of kid that didn't feel like, why am I learning math? Why am I learning history? And just like, and all he wanted to do was create something. He certainly created a lot of gags and cons and stuff like that. So definitely has some kind of creative streak. How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I definitely didn't get into as much trouble as this kid did when I was a kid. But I think the movie did a good job of throwing in some kind of universal things that a lot of kids feel. You definitely get the sense early on in the movie that he has a huge distrust of adults that are around him, authority figures that are around him. Because, like you said, every time they try to straighten him out, it's always for the worse.
Mhm.
Um, I think the movie touches on that pretty well throughout, especially in the classroom scenes and any scene featuring him and his mom and stepdad.
Mhm. Yeah, I was the emotional kid that cried all the time and got bullied all the time, so I definitely was not the troublemaker. That was my brother, Ethan. He was the bad kid. I was the good kid. Kevin knows this. At least Kevin and I have
It's
known each other
true.
since sixth grade, so we've known each other long enough to know each other when we were younger. Um, but no, I definitely was not this kid. I went home, I did hours of homework, and that was life. So that was me. I was that kid. But it's interesting watching this because I've always found it interesting watching films about kids like this because I'm just like dumbasses. And it's just one of those kind of things where it's like I never really connected with it, but like watching it as an adult and realizing like how much could be possibly going on. Like Joe, I'm sure your experiences, a lot of young people's experiences that don't know that they have, like the amount of people I know that have ADHD and how it affects people. It's like between you, Matt, my wife, everybody else.
Like if
And
it didn't get treated, we would have possibly gone into like a whole life of crime. Or I mean, I'm not saying speaking for everybody, but like it could lead to there are people out there that have undiagnosed ADHD that get tied into drugs and alcohol and crime.
I on some level, I imagine for the community fans out there, I imagine this kid growing up to being Matt Berry's character who teaches grifting 101.
You hit me with a
With a
woman's hand,
woman's hand.
you Midwest
Midwest
enthusiast.
enthusiast. And it's just
I
like,
lived in New York.
I lived in New York. Ah, and he just runs away.
I
One of my
love,
favorite quotes from any show ever. So ridiculous.
and it's
But
like I love that that's the quote, and it's like the least preferred episode by fans, but it is such a
I don't
good
get it.
episode in my opinion.
I don't get it.
Is
But
it the
either.
Dungeons and Dragons episode? Is it the same one?
No,
oh, that Dungeons and Dragons episode's amazing, but it
it
got
is.
taken down because of quote unquote blackface.
There was
And I'm
another
like,
one they did too in season 5 with David Cross, which was pretty good too. But yeah,
but this isn't a community podcast, but that would be a lot of fun.
It might be.
Spin off. So
On Joe's point, I don't know if this is relevant. If this might take us in the wrong direction, but I watched Amy last night, the Amy Winehouse documentary, from A24, on Max, I believe. But
Of
she
course it
she
is.
had issues as a teenager with like mood disorders and bulimia, I think, and she like was taking some kind of drug, maybe experimentally. I don't remember. I don't know what it can really do for you at that age, at like 13, if that's really a good idea or not. But like when we're talking about 1959, like that wasn't even on the teacher's radar. They were not qualified to be dealing with behavioral disorders of any kind in the classroom. So like as a former teacher, I kind of felt bad for the French teacher, but he was kind of a sourpuss. I think he earned whatever abuse the kids were heaping on him.
That's why they called him Sourpuss.
I feel like it's such an interesting thing because watching a film like this as you get older gives you a whole entire different perspective because one, there's that nostalgia of growing up where it isn't like, oh, I know exactly how this feels, and it's just like, remember, love love the idea of it. And like thinking back to like when you're a kid where you're carefree and didn't have responsibilities, but also as you grow older, really understanding like all the adults in this situation, all the shit that they go through. Because like it's very interesting watching films now. Like I was watching a film today, doesn't it deals with some serious mental health issues. And like there's a stepfather, they're not married, so he's not technically a stepfather, but there's a stepfather figure in it. And like I know if I watched this 10 years ago, I would have been like, what a wasteless piece of crap. And then I'm sitting here watching this movie and being like, this guy didn't sign up for any of this. And honestly, he's just trying to get some sense across to this kid. And it's one of those kinds of things where it's like having that kind of perspective. And I feel like this film is mature enough to understand like you don't just draw um trunch bowls and stuff like that where it's just like the most mean possible, like either you have Trunchbull or you have Matilda's parents, and like everybody's terrible, and like Miss Honey's like the idyllic only good person adult in the room. This film doesn't have that, and it's a lot easier to make a film that way because it makes it a lot easier to support the protagonist, your kid in the situation. But I appreciate that this film has more layers than that. And you would expect that from like a French new wave art house cinema film that isn't just trying to play the easy beats of a story, but trying to challenge you and trying to see like these adults are all in some way struggling with these things. Like his stepdad's not his biological father. And I imagine on some level that guy has some, whether it's on the surface or underneath, regrets of like, what did I sign up for? kind of thing here with all the trouble and everything. And I think the ability to see like that's a very human reaction makes this such a more interesting and complicated story to take in. And I feel like those are the coming of age stories that are going to last. I feel like one of the reasons why Boyhood made such a big impact is just like, was his parents perfect? Like Patricia Arquette's character and Ethan Hawke's character certainly not perfect, but like you see the layers to them, and I feel like those are the best coming of age stories is when you can see obviously our protagonist is this kid growing up, but being able to see the layers and complexities of the adults around him makes it a lot more interesting.
And one thing about that I like is that they kept it from the kid's perspective.
Mhm.
There were a bunch of scenes in this movie, just to think of an example, where you're about to get these two adults alone in a scene together, and then it cuts away like a second after they're about to be alone, and you see the kid's perspective, like when the mom sneaks back home and she goes off into the other room to talk to the stepdad, and it's just you just hear them fighting from the kid's perspective. There's a couple other scenes where they tell the kid to leave the room. It looks like we're about to have a scene with the two adults together, and then it cuts away again. One thing I do like is that they're keeping it just from that kid's perspective the entire time, and that's what we're drawing from when we're seeing these things happen. So there's probably more to the story that we're just not seeing. It's not on screen.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too of realizing that it's very obviously from the kid's perspective and we don't get a whole lot of like the other conversation going on because like how many times in a film have you seen like that scene with like the school counselors and the parents and being like, what are we going to do with this kid? We're going to suspend him, we're going to expel him, and the parents being upset was like, you're failing my kid. And we don't get that kind of thing where it's just the adults talking about our protagonist. It's all from his perspective, and it's an interesting thing to keep, especially I always think it's always interesting too. Like this is an adult, obviously, who wrote and is directing this film. Very few times do you get a screenplay written by like an actual kid or a teenager. Super bad. So, which obviously is very relatable as like a teenager because it was written by teenagers. But the idea of like being able to for Truffaut to be able to put himself back into that situation and seeing how this is all playing out in that specific perspective.
Yeah, I was.
And I definitely.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry,
sorry. Go
Kevin.
ahead.
You want me to go ahead?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking about Holden Caulfield from like Catcher in the Rye, which is also 50s.
Mhm.
And then for some reason, maybe the school scenes, Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd. But
No education. There you go. You're welcome.
wasn't sure where I should jump in. Uh, but again, it's like it's really complicated in a way that if this movie had been written by a child, they wouldn't have the perspective to be able to make it that complex. Yeah.
Mhm.
Whereas, I mean, my point is about Holden Caulfield's really confused in Catcher in the Rye. Like he really doesn't know what's going on. He's seeing everything in 2 dimensions instead of 3. And then A Brick in the Wall is like very actively anti-establishment. It's taking a stance, you know, like this is us against them kind of a thing. And the movie 400 Blows, which I still don't know the meaning of the title. If anybody could enlighten me.
I was going to ask everybody the same question.
Much
It
more
might be a lost in translation thing. I don't know.
Must do research.
I'm done.
Kevin, you talk while I figure it out.
Yeah, so one thing I was going to say is that I got the impression that the stepdad of all the adult characters in the movie was probably putting in the most effort to relate to this kid on some level that didn't involve disciplining him. Um, there was the whole scene where he's like, "We're gonna make a supper for two," and he's just there in the kitchen talking to the kid. I enjoyed that scene, and most scenes in the movie involving his mother felt a little bit more tense to me. Um, you get the stepdad saying, make sure you don't anger her. Uh, Obviously, he sees his mom cheating on the stepdad in the street when he's out with his friend skipping school. And then I was just thinking about that, and towards the end of the movie, there's a scene where he's at the facility, the institution that they put him in, the academy, whatever it was. And the mom comes in, she says, don't go looking for your father, he's not here. And then she sits down with him, and she's talking about how the stepdad has closed the book on this kid for the rest of his life. He's not going to be a part of this anymore. And I wonder how much of that was just the mom, and not actually the stepdad's intent. And I wanted to know what your guys' thoughts were on that too.
That's tough knowing that like you weren't wanted. I think that comes out in the scene where, with the therapist at the end. He's like, at a certain point, it became apparent to him. Um, I like the idea that kids are aware of more. They might not be able to articulate it. They might not really understand, but like they are more aware of what's going on than we give them credit for, you know? And he apparently, how old is he in this movie? Like 12?
He's 12 in the description on Max, yeah.
So yeah, knowing that like your mother didn't want you, that's a lot to deal with. You know what I mean? No matter how she treats you, which seems a little bit, from what we see in the movie, it's a little not bipolar, but like when he acts out, she rewards him with a bath and a whole evening together, and she's very loving and kind to him. But she's not always that way to him, obviously.
It reminds me of Fences, where it's like, I don't have to like you. My job is to love you and to take care of you, but that doesn't mean I have to like you. And like that kind of parental relationship is so challenging because it's putting the child in such a box at a distance of like, I love you because I'm meant to love you, but because like, do any of you feel like you have a relationship with a parent that's borderline on like an actual friendship?
Yeah, I would say so. I'd say like me and my
I was
dad.
about to
Oh,
say you're
oh, totally, 100%. I hate saying it this way, but I always found him to be a better friend than a being a great father. Which again sounds so bad saying that, but at the same time, you know, kind of indicates the relationship we have, where it's mostly my mother that was mostly the authoritarian one, but so in some ways you kind of have that balance.
he got to be fun
Um,
dad.
yeah, I've got the fun. I'm glad you could speak for that because you got to meet my fun dad a couple times.
Well, no, like I met your parents a couple of times. Like I could
Yeah,
definitely tell that you have that kind of relationship with your
yeah.
dad, that like you have that kind of friendship. But
Mhm.
like, how about you, Jim?
No, I wouldn't say that we have a friendship kind of a relationship. Um, Even if we're gonna like spend time together, it's always regimented, like Christmas, Thanksgiving,
Mhm.
birthdays, whatever. We get together, we have dinner, you know, and then we part ways, you know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I think I probably can relate more to that scene from Fences than you know, than I'd like to admit, maybe.
very fair. How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, well, I definitely, thankfully, have a good relationship with both of my parents, but I wouldn't say either that I'm like friends I've got that type of relationship with either of them. Maybe more so my mom than my dad.
Yeah, I know.
If I had to pick.
I I have a complicated relationship with my dad, seeing as he left when I was 2 and sporadically was in my life for most of my life and then wasn't in my life at all for like 7 years by choice. Um, and now it's like I see him every so often. Like we could like watch football and stuff like that and have a good time doing that. But like my mom's the one who raised me along with my grandparents. I had a relationship with my grandparents too that were definitely more like a parent relationship than a grandparent relationship. And probably the closest relationship was my grandpa in many ways. But like my mom and I have been so like it's weird because like we spend so much time together, but there's a quote from have any of you seen 20th Century Women?
No.
Um, Great film, highly recommend. It's such a beautiful look at relationships. But Annette Benning's the mother who runs a boarding house and is a single mother to a son, teenage son. Greta Gerwig is this free spirited young woman who lives as one of the boarders. And Annette Benning says, you have the opportunity to know my son. I'll never know my son. I'll always just be his mother. And I remember watching that film for the first time and realizing, like, how often am I like my true self in front of my parents or my family? Most of my family just thinks I'm the weird, quiet kid that likes school and math. And none of them really talk to me a whole lot. But like on some level, like I've gotten better and more comfortable being myself around my mom, but like do my parents really know me deeply in that way? And it's such an interesting dynamic that you see in this film of like, I feel like the mother's in that place where like I don't know if this mother's ever gonna know this kid, but I feel like the stepdad's legitimately trying to know this kid. And I feel like that's a special thing, especially for somebody who's not like biologically responsible. It's not the fences thing where it's just like there's no obligation there that like I have to take care of you. I'm supposed to love you. But it's very interesting. And also thank you all for being willing to open up about your personal
Yeah.
lives with the discussion. But like I feel like this is a kind of film that opens up that kind of like opens up the book to thinking about those kinds of things because like how would this kid's situation be different if like he had a different situation around him, and that's always challenging because I know my brother and I dealt with because like my dad left when I was barely 2, and like my brother spent a lot more time with my dad because he on and off lived with him and worked with him and stuff like that. But like my brother and I had very different ways that we handled our situations. And to be fair, too, my brother's also had serious health issues since he was 4 years old. So like he had this whole other weight on his shoulders that he had to deal with that I didn't. But there was months at a time I didn't see my mom because she'd be at the hospital with my brother and I'd just be alone. And honestly, I spent a lot of time alone until I went away to college. Like I was a quiet kid. I went home, I did my business, didn't really talk to many people. Like Kevin and I have been friends since 6th grade, and I think can relate a little bit to
Yeah,
some
we've
of
got
our
that in common. Yeah.
little bit of our experiences together. But
I
like,
was a quiet kid too.
yeah. But I do have an answer to the question about the title. So the this is a gross misinterpretation of the original title. So
Huh.
bad translation from French. The I'm not going to try to say the French because it's going to sound terrible. But its meaning is to live a wild life. The literal translation is to do the 400 dirty tricks.
Okay. So some type of French idiom or something that's lost in translation.
Yeah. So then Americans over here are just like 400 blows, and then it literally makes no sense.
He's going to be
So
selling blow.
we don't want that for this kid. Hopefully he won't be. Could be though.
I was kind of expecting it to have to do with him being like slapped around or beaten
Like
or
disciplined.
disciplined. That never
Or
really.
yeah,
Yeah, I
maybe
had that
like
thought too. He does get
I get,
slapped a lot in this
see
movie.
see look how we're like fitting that in there because like certainly takes a lot of blows to his experience of coming of age with all the discipline and stuff like that, but we're reaching because that's not actually what this means. But he certainly is living a wild life, and I have a feeling he'll probably live one too as he grows up. But does anybody have anything else that they wanted to mention about the film before I jump into my question about where do you think this kid's going to wind up?
Um, since we're talking about the French New Wave, I think it's kind of just a question I have about the French New Wave and from my experience about the filmmakers that are inspired by it. The thing is that common people, you didn't have to go to like a fancy school or get like a proper education in order to make these, really thought-provoking type of movies. Is that kind of what French Wave started in a sense, or is it different than that?
So, to read some notes here. So, the French New Wave is an art house film movement that emerged in the late 50s. The movement was characterized by its rejection of traditional filmmaking conventions in favor of experimentation and spirit of uh, iconoclasm. New wave filmmakers explored new approaches to editing, visual style, and narrative, as well as engagement with the social and political upheavals of the era, often making use of irony or exploring existential themes. So I I guess that could be because like I would imagine at some point. So like this is very interesting because I'm doing my whole podcast, The Cinematic Wasteland, going through the history of film. And at the very beginning, film was not a refined thing. It's like, oh, go have fun making your little kid video things. And like there wasn't a lot of respect attached to cinema. And like Georges Méliès was a magician, just doing tricks on screen and stuff like that and revolutionized film. And like Thomas Edison was the one that really was a big proponent early on because he had the money to push everybody around and the authority to do so. But like I feel like as film went on, like these big studios and everything, like film was a big thing, and you had to have the money to be able to do it. And these kinds of filmmakers, Joe, to hit on what you were talking about, I feel like takes that out of the equation. And you don't need to have like a big studio backing you with like hundreds of thousands of dollars, trying to be thinking about inflation here, trying to make these films because like, well, Cleopatra was like $4 million and that was obscene, like the budget for that film. But like looking at like Jean-Luc Godard, Agnes Varda, I have a I have a collection of her films, and it's very, very much like slice of life, very intimate and kind of on the ground kind of feel to those stories. And I do feel like it's that kind of thing where you don't need a big budget. You don't need something to be able to try something different. And you don't need like this big studio to be pushing this story or pushing this production. It doesn't have to feel like a production. A lot of these don't feel like films. They feel
Yeah.
like very like home video,
Like
like
you
a
don't need to
camera
have a
following you
giant,
around.
chariot race like at Ben Hur or anything. It could just be, a walk in the park.
But it's pretty great, isn't it?
That is true.
And part of that is how they have he's in this cramped little living space. So it's like the camera is just stuck in
Yep.
a corner of the room, and that's the feeling you get as opposed to a gigantic set
Yeah, because
I,
like
I
what's
in
just
a
realized
blockbuster.
I just realized something too ironically about that in the sense like Mad Max is a lot like that. The first Mad Max. And then here you go to like Mad Max Fury Road and it's like
is
Ben-Hur.
it's like Warner Brothers is like $150 million. Go get lost in the desert for 9 months. See what you come up with. And it's interesting because some of the influence was Italian neorealism. So like the Italians were the ones that were really experimenting. Like I imagine like Fellini and directors like that were doing all kinds of weird shit, like Eight and a Half. That movie is completely off of any traditional sense of what a film is.
Oh yeah.
And some of the most important things is this heavily influenced new Hollywood. And who are the big members of like the new Hollywood movement were, you know, Scorsese and Coppola and those kinds of filmmakers that were taking that influence because like Coppola went as far as making his own studio. Obviously bankrupted it with Apocalypse Now, but like it was the likes of Cassavetes. I have a Criterion collection of his films too. 100% influenced by like this idea of like this doesn't feel like you're watching a film, you're watching people. You're living people's lives. And it's like, yeah, this is real, man. And that kind of thing where it's just like I'm not watching like and I don't know why this popped in my head, but it's because it's from the 50s, like Forbidden Planet, like is the most artificial possible kind of film that you could come up with, but it's on a completely different kind of experience than watching something like this. Like this isn't as somebody, and I'll speak for myself because we all have our own particular tastes in film, but like I'm very much the kind of I love genre films. I love science fiction. I love fantasy. I love westerns. I love that kind of stuff. And they do feel like productions. Like this isn't my vibe. And I would take a genre film over a straight up drama most any day. Like if you look at all like my recent years of like my favorite films, so many of them have been like Annihilation or Ex Machina, Mad Max Fury Road. I do have, I think I have some kind of fascination with Irish cinema because Banshees and Belfast were my last two top movies. But the thing is, it's like those are also very more human stories, except Banshees isn't quite exactly what you would expect from a regular drama. But I know what makes a film like this stand out to me personally is if I love it. Because if this is something that's very human, very mundane, very that kind of experience, and it connects with me that deeply and makes it stand out to me, then I realize that's a really special film because it doesn't have all the other things going for it, like special effects or these big stories and these giant universal themes and ideas that a lot of science fiction goes into. But this is definitely such an interesting time period in film, and I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about it.
I almost got in a fight one time because I said this was at like a party. I said nothing happens in Boyhood, and I didn't mean it to be a knock on the movie, but that's what I meant. Like it's if not realistic, it's what you would call the slice of life, right?
It's
And
like
somebody loved the movie, and then they got really
yeah.
upset, and we almost came to 400 lunches over it.
But no one complains about saying that about Seinfeld because that's the whole premise is that it's just telling you it's a show about
What's
nothing.
the deal? It's about nothing. Um, but that's the thing. That doesn't have they don't have plot devices. They don't have MacGuffins. They don't have something specifically driving a plot forward. It's just your journey is experience the life of this character, and that's the purpose. And that's a it doesn't need my permission to say that it's a perfectly acceptable way of making a film. Been doing it for so long. And who am I? But like a film can be that way. And if you do it well and it still moves you, it connects you, and like cherry on whipped cream on top, if you could do something interesting filmically with it. Like there's great films that are quote unquote about nothing or nothing happens. Just life happens. And if you can make life happening feel special and unique and interesting, then you did something great. Well, I guess wrapping up here, where's this kid winding up?
Well, maybe he's gonna go back to that anti-gravity ride. That seems
gonna-
pretty fun.
He's gonna run a carnival. That's what that kid's gonna do.
Maybe he becomes the next Cousteau because he's looking out into the ocean, and he, that's French.
I'm just looking at my Life Aquatic poster on the wall.
Yeah, right.
How about you, Jim? What do you think?
I really didn't feel optimistic after watching that movie. I'm glad, Kevin, you brought up the gravitron thing. The rotor. I looked this up after the movie. It's called the rotor, the predecessor of the gravitron. Did you guys feel like he was trying to fight it? Like he would turn himself upside down. He was trying to like separate himself from he was trying to fight gravity.
Yeah, I did get a sense that he was doing more than the other patrons of that ride.
Yeah, I feel like that scene, there were a lot of long takes in the movie that may have something to do with the style of the French New Wave. Maybe it's a trademark of Truffaut, but that was one of them, and it made me go, "Oh, this scene's important. Like, there's more going on here than what we're just looking at." You know what I mean? So yeah, I didn't have a good feeling about his future at the end of the movie.
I feel like this kid is not going to hold down a job, and he's always going to be that kid trying to piece things together through whatever means necessary, but he's just going to keep chugging along, struggling every turn, and your person in his life just being like, you need to get your shit together. But I don't think this kid's ever going to get his shit together.
We can find out because apparently there's 4 sequels to this movie. One of them being a short film. I found this out on Wikipedia after we watched it. There's 3 more movies featuring this character as the main character by the same director. There was a short film in 1962 called Antoine and Colette. There was a movie in 1968 called Stolen Kisses. In 1970, Bed and Board. And then in 1979, Love on the Run closes out this character's film arc.
They have
so there's more adventures with
them.
Is there a sequel where he has to go into like a damn competition against evil Germans? Because I feel like that's the direction most franchises go into. It's that there has to be German villains and maybe space.
The last movie in this series is about him getting divorced, apparently. Oh. So
I think Jim called it there.
I'm trying to see if there's like a specific collection from Criterion of this series. See, now I gotta check to see if that short film's on there. See, Criterion would do something like that. But anyway, well, this got personal and this got deep. But
well,
hopefully I hope you all enjoyed this conversation from us putting ourselves all out there. And no, I don't know if we should be bringing a 12-year-old to Applebee's, especially us. So just throwing that out there. But from Joe, from Jim, from Kevin, and Shane, Thank you as always for tuning in and always supporting the Development Hell podcast.